Okay, on this video, what I am doing is just doing a few of the problems from part one and part two of 6.1. You should have already read everything and looked at the previous videos where I try to guide you through the book a little bit to give you an idea of what you should be looking at. Here, I actually wrote 5 down here and 6 up here, but this is just to give you a little comparison of how your translations would differ depending on the terminology. So let's take a look at this lower one first, number 5 in part 1, 6.1. It says, if Chanel has a rosewood fragrance, then so does Lanvin. Okay, if Chanel has a rosewood fragrance, then so does Lanvin. You know this is an if-then statement. You could circle those. And I did give you a capital letter here. If you choose a different one, that's okay. And even in the homework, if you do it and then you have the same form, your operator's in the same place, but there's different capital letters on the possible responses, that's okay. Just pick that form, with the different capital letters. Okay, so this one is an if-then statement. So you should know already now that you'll need a horseshoe. And then it's a fairly straightforward one. It should just be if C, then L, or C horseshoe L. Now let's compare it to number 6, which I have at the top of the page here. This is again in part 1. Chanel has a rosewood fragrance if Lanvin does. Now once again, you have the if. If alone without the then will tell you that you have a conditional statement. But in this case, if is in the middle of the sentence. And we know from what I said in the previous video plus the readings that whatever comes after if is the antecedent of your conditional. And so this one would get translated L horseshoe C. Okay, so this is your antecedent, this is your consequent. This is also the sufficient condition and the necessary condition. Make sure you read about that in the book. Okay. Let's move on to some other examples. This one is in part 2. It's another simple statement, but a nice one to take a look at. It says, unless we reduce the incidence of child abuse, future crime rates will increase. Unless is your indicator, and it tells you that you're going to have the wedge or disjunction. It would not be, I have the letters underline here, and they should be turned, of course, into capital letters, but it wouldn't be a well-formed formula to say something like this. That's literally what it looks like. You don't want that. We always place the disjunction between the two statements. So that would be the correct translation for number 1 in part 2. Okay, now here's a good one to keep in mind when you do the homework. And I tried to point this out in that video where I talked about the book. Psychologists and psychiatrists do not both prescribe antidepressant drugs. Your indicator here is and then you have this do not both. So you know that you have a conjunction, but you also are going to need a negation somewhere. You really don't even know if you need 1 or 2 now, but you do know they're telling you that not both of these, right? This is sort of saying that both of these types of people prescribe drugs. So here's one of these places where if you're stuck, you can take a look in the book at that chart that I showed you and also the examples that I showed you. And the one that we have fits pretty closely to this one here. Not both Megan and Kathy are winners. And then Hurley also gives you a formula for not both A and B, which tells you that this is how it should look. So let's go back over here. And now just using our letters, I used P for psychologists and S for psychiatrists. We're just going to follow that form you had in the book. And so this one will be like this. Okay. That says not both P and S. And just so you know also, this is equivalent to not P or not S. And let's say that you were trying to just reason this out on your own and you came up with this, but then you went into the homework. This one's not a homework problem, but you'll have something similar. Let's say you had something like this and you reasoned it out this way. And then you got to the homework assignment, and this was not an option, but this is. Choose it. These are logically equivalent, which means that they can always be used in place of each other. This one is appropriate because, or probably the more natural one to choose because it does have the conjunction, but that is logically equivalent to it. Okay, couple more. Here you have a compound statement. It says, if internet use continues to grow, then more people will become cyber addicts and normal human relations will deteriorate. This is in, I think it's part 2. Sorry, I have part 3 there, but it's part 2, number 11. So if you want, pause the video, try this one out, see if you could at least pick out the operators and see if you could translate it so that you have the main operator correct, and then resume the video and I'll do it for you. Okay, so in this one you have an if-then statement, you can see that, and you also have a conjunction. So what I like to do in this kind of a case is, if I have if, then, and that compound statement, here's what this looks like. Okay, and let's take a look here. You always try to put into here your comma because that will show you where your main operator is. It tells you, and in fact, in this case, you see that you have the comma in here, but you also have then and the rest of this together. So that tells you that this one is a conditional that has a conjunction in the consequent. So if we fill in the letters now, the correct translation would be I horseshoe normal people. I'm sorry, people and for normal human relations. So that would be the correct translation for that one. Okay. If you put the parentheses around I horseshoe P, that's not correct. And you want to use your comma there, and as well as then you can see all of this comes after. And then, let's see, human life will not perish unless either we poison ourselves with pollution or a large asteroid collides with the Earth. So in this case, you have human life will not perish. You're going to have something like not H there. And then you have a disjunction that has 2 disjuncts in it. So here you're going to have not H or either P or A. So that would be the correct translation. And here again you have unless either, and that kind of tips you off that this unless here is going to have an either or statement on the right side. And for that, if you wanted to look in the book, you could come back. This was the example with all of the Prozac and where he talks about the different drugs. And it gives you a bunch of different examples of how to place the parentheses there. Okay, so hopefully this will give you an idea of some of, how to approach some of these. And hopefully you got something from this and that'll help you to do the homework.